Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, the warning hazardous weather graphic that includes warnings, watches, and advisories. Remember yesterday we had a high wind watch out for the Alaska Range for Tuesday, and today that's become a warning, and that actually goes into effect at midnight tonight for winds. Southerly winds begin to increase and will start to gust to 60 and eventually 70 miles an hour through the passes. Again, starting tonight, and this is out through Tuesday night until about 6 a.m. Wednesday morning. So quite a windy period here coming up for the Alaska Range as well as other locations. Here, just a little to the north there, that's a wind advisory zone on the north side of the northern range there. And that's for gusts of 60 miles an hour, and also back over the northern Kuskokwim Valley, McGrath, Nikolai under a wind advisory, under the influence of a wind advisory for the same time period, and that's for winds expected to gust above 60 miles per hour. And from there, moving on to satellite imagery, you can see another surge of moisture here pushing up into southern Alaska. Actually, one band right through here, and then another one obviously stands out quite vividly there over the eastern Gulf of Alaska that kept it cloudy and wet there over the Panhandle during the day today, and to a lesser extent lighter precipitation back along the North Gulf Coast. But the heavier rainfall amounts, just under an inch falling since midnight at Klawock today, while half an inch rainfall amounts during the same time period since midnight, up to about half an inch at Wrangell, and Cake falling, lighter amounts to the north. Also, Yakutat had a little over half an inch of rain that same time period there, so pretty wet day here in these areas. And breezy conditions, 15 to 30 mile an hour winds with snow showers and areas of snow, starting out snow mixing with rain in the afternoon in some areas. Here as temperatures warm, and you can see this band up toward St. Lawrence Island. General area of low pressure out here over the Bering Sea, and then a good southwest flow on the south side of that, and a lot of moisture streaming northeastward here, just reaching the Alaska Peninsula during the afternoon, and late this afternoon there'll be rain onto the peninsula by that time, associated with a warm front that's farther back down to the south. Otherwise, again, general area low pressure, gusty winds, 40 to 50 mile an hour gusts out of the west, Adak and Atka today with lots of shower activity on back towards Shemya. See some breaks here over the central interior, sunshine breaking out today, as well as looks like down over Kodiak Island, rain tapered off this afternoon after they picked up about 0.2 of an inch there at the state airport since midnight last night, with looks like clearing occurring, drier this afternoon. Same thing for the Alaska Peninsula there. A little bit of a break ahead of that next surge of moisture coming up with that warm front. On the chart, there is that warm front right roughly, give or take, in about that position there. Kind of a developing wave right through here. Main low center back out to the west. And then this weakening front that pushed up the area late last night or overnight and in toward the Panhandle actually yesterday, stalling out there along the southeast coast. Today, good south to north jet there, holding that in place, pulling the moisture northward. Again, decent, respectable rainfall amount since midnight, nothing all that heavy, but did keep it wet all day through this area. Higher elevations, mostly in the form of snow, and kind of a mix everywhere else. One band tried pushing north of the Alaska Range. We tried to bring a little precip north of the Alaska Range, didn't quite make it. Just some light scattered rain or snow showers along and south of the mountains there, with clearing off to the north, up to the north slope, showing up cloudy there, but it's just because the temperature is still down in the single numbers up in that area. Areas of rain and snow showers mixed with rain here. Again, a surge right along the coast, Nunivak Island, and another one that pushed inland here, pushing across the Yukon Delta area, but amounts pretty light there as well. And rainfall amounts today in the last 12 hours, not all that much over the Alaska Peninsula since this batch of rain quite hasn't even reached there yet by early or mid-afternoon, but will shortly here, probably by this evening. Otherwise, gusts to about 50 miles an hour occurred Cape Newenham today, enough of a gradient out there to keep it pretty breezy there along the coast at a normally windier area out there. And again, the stronger winds over Adak and Atka with that low center. We'll see tonight this developing wave here actually forms a low center. It pulls northward right off the southwest coast. That tightens the gradient up here considerably. Definitely gale force winds, rain, possibly heavy at times working into Kodiak into the southwest interior. Becoming quite windy along the western Alaska range areas. Southwest interior stays pretty windy. And probably late tonight on toward tomorrow morning, kick that high wind warning in for the Alaska range. Otherwise, the old front here keeps it wet along the North Gulf Coast, cloudy, occasional light rain on down toward the Panhandle or along the Panhandle, but this is becoming quite weak here and stays dry over the areas north of the Alaska Range all the way to the Arctic Coast and North Slope, and could be a little bit of snow, increasing northeast winds here if it stays cold enough from about Kivalina on down to St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, very windy conditions, numerous rain and snow showers across all of the Aleutians there. And again, winds gusting anywhere from 40 to 60 miles an hour out in those areas. And then for tomorrow, that low center pulls up to near St. Lawrence Island, the front here to about this position. And again, by then, the 70 mile per hour wind gusts will be in full array across the Alaska Range there, and also quite windy for the North Gulf Coast, south central Alaska. Let's see the mountain passes. Anchorage in the city could see 40 to 50 mile an hour southeast winds during the day tomorrow, advancing westward across the city, coming down out of the hillside areas with Turnagain Arm definitely higher than that, especially with the front west of the area here. Western, or hasn't gotten east of Cook Inlet as that low center tracks north here out over the Bering Sea. So very windy day coming up south central Alaska, including the Anchorage, Palmer, and on up across the Alaska Range. Not so bad over the Panhandle, just getting clipped by the remnants of this trough here, and generally dry with a lot less wind in that area. Very windy again, 40, 60 mile an hour westerly winds here for the Aleutians. Numerous rain showers mixed with snow. Most of the snow shower activity will be offshore back over the western Bering. Stays dry and probably mostly sunny there for the Yukon Flats northward to the eastern Arctic coast. Outlook for Wednesday. That low center really doesn't move a whole lot, just kind of drifts right around St. Lawrence Island there. And the first front is this trough right through here that weakens again as it approaches the Panhandle, brings some rain into the northern areas, probably not even affecting areas to the south as it rides through that zone of high pressure, but stays wet here, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula. Actually another front developing and moving in to the area there. Mixture of precipitation over the southwest. Looks like probably snow maybe, especially early on, depending on your time of day here. Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, southward to Nunivak Island. Cold air coming around behind this trough axis, so back to the mixed precipitation for the Pribilofs, and showers and breezy for the eastern Aleutians, but dry out over the western Aleutians. A little breezy out there for Adak and Atka, but dry conditions and probably less wind than what you see today out there for Wednesday. And variable clouds isolated the scattered rain and snow showers up over the northern interior areas here, Arctic coast, but as you can see, pretty hit and miss and nothing all that significant at all. Staying dry for the most part there. And then for low temperatures forecast tonight, either side of zero for the Arctic coast and North Slope, with teens into the Brooks Range to actually 20s, 20 to 25 into the Brooks Range on the south side there, and 25 to 35 Tanana Valley, depending on where the wind is and the clouds. Some areas staying well above freezing. South central Alaska, 35 to 40 for the lows, upper 30s, lower 40s for the Panhandle, upper 30s out here for the Aleutians. And then for the highs tomorrow, notice Tanana Valley there, that downsloping wind off the Alaska Range. Temperatures could approach 60 degrees in some locations up there, mid-50s in the greater Fairbanks area. Pretty good bet with mid-50s or 50s all the way over to the border. Northward, continuing upward trend in those temperatures, upper teens now, even along the Arctic coast, mid to upper, rising above freezing in the Brooks Range there. You can see mid to upper 30s pushing up across the Kobuk and Selawik Valley areas, with 34, the forecast high at Point Hope, 40s, mid 40s, Kuskokwim Valley, near 50 for Bristol Bay or upper 40s. And then the lows the following morning, 5 to 10 on the Arctic coast, warming into the mid to upper 30s, southern Alaska near 40 along the coast, with upper 30s to near 40 for the Panhandle. Out west, the Aleutians, mid 30s there, lower 30s for the Pribilofs, upper 20s to St. Lawrence Island. And for the afternoon highs, lower to mid 20 or in the 20s, in some cases up toward 30 for the eastern Arctic coast. And a little cooler here for the central Tanana Valley, but still in the lower 50s, upper 40s there, and 40s southern Alaska, 40s to lower 50s for the Panhandle, lower 40s for the southeast coast, and lower 30s also for St. Lawrence Island.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Looking at the first fly-in weather graphic, IFR eastern Beaufort Sea coast there over toward Mackenzie River Bay. Also up here along the northwest coast, barely grazing the coastline there, but it looks like it'll be in over Point Hope, Cape Lisburne. Another batch down here along the southwest coast, and a bigger batch here around Kodiak Island coming up the east side of the western Alaska range and advancing slowly to the northeast. Otherwise, marginal VFR starting the day out Tuesday here for the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, Copper River Basin, and pretty marginal for the Panhandle. That continues into the afternoon over most of the area there. It looks like some VFR, Prince of Wales Island, Annette, Metlakatla, Ketchikan, those locations, on down to Dixon Entrance. IFR, more widespread North Gulf Coast, east of Yakutat now, but not quite to Elfin Cove. Back to the east side of the Kenai Peninsula, and expanding northward on the eastern slopes of the Alaska Range. Swath of VFR right through here from southeast Norton Sound on down toward Iliamna Lake, at least on the west end there. Otherwise, marginal VFR, IFR northwest coast has now pushed inland a little bit. No change for the Arctic coast, north slope areas, Bering Sea, marginal VFR tending to taper off out west. Then for the Wednesday morning outlook here, we've got southern slopes of the Central Brooks Range, IFR, north side, downsloping, VFR slot there, otherwise marginal VFR on out to the Arctic coast. VFR, Kotzebue Sound, northwest coast now, into the central interior, north of the mountains, VFR here, those downsloping winds possibly, excuse me. And then we've got this zone of IFR here over the eastern North Gulf Coast areas, right on up into Yakutat, Dry Bay, over toward Elfin Cove, VFR over the southern Panhandle, and marginal VFR, Bering Sea and the Aleutians, which in the afternoon pretty much holds out here, although we got VFR showing up, becoming a little more widespread way out there to the west. But marginal VFR right up the southwest coast and inland across the Kuskokwim Valley, and southern Alaska marginal, north of the mountains though, in the Alaska Range mountains there. Tanana Valley, 40-mile country looking VFR. Upslope here again, so marginal VFR, patchy IFR on the south side of the Brooks Range, and then downsloping winds, VFR for the north slope, and IFR, Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, and a zone still hangs along and off the northern southeast coast. Anahtuvik and Atigan, both marginal VFR tomorrow, Tuesday. For Lake Clark and Merrill, call it IFR throughout much of the day. Rainy IFR mainly on the eastern entrance. That'll be increasing throughout the day from south to north there, but on the east side mostly. Windy, marginal VFR, southern entrance, otherwise VFR. Isabel, marginal. Mentasta, marginal VFR. Tanita, marginal. And Portage, definitely IFR, either approach. Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. Freezing levels, 2,000 to 4,000 feet here. Good southerly winds. Again, the high wind warnings out in the Alaska Range, so that's a good surge of warm air coming northward, 4,000 feet in over the Tanana Valley, and then 2,000 feet back along the North Gulf Coast. A little bit warmer air just south of Kodiak, 4,000 to 6,000 foot freezing levels there, as well as down toward Dixon Entrance. Chillier, though, out over the Bering Sea, but the surface there up still north of St. Matthew Island, well into the northwest interior just about there, and then back down along or just north of the North Gulf Coast here, and Panhandle. Looking at icing, we've got several batches out here to the west and northwest, up St. Lawrence Island into the northwest coast, couple right through here, and then the main batch in coming up to the North Gulf Coast here. Could actually be some areas of considerable moderate in there. With this, it'd be in this zone, out of all the ones I've got marked on here, would be the heavier icing threats above about 4,000 to 6,000 feet. Lesser threats, maybe mixed icing Kodiak Island out over the eastern Aleutians. Taking a look at the jet stream. Big upper level low coming up towards St. Lawrence Island. Strong southerly jet, 130 knots here, kind of splitting right there. One branch angling into the Yakutat area. This one wrapping around the main low center, and 9,000 feet. 40 to 60 knot winds out of the southwest right into the interior, 50 knots Prince William Sound. Diminishing winds as you head north there, and also not quite as windy over the Panhandle. 3,000 feet, we've got, again, 35 to 50 knot winds coming around this low center. Southerlies 50 to 60 knots, western interior, lighter to the north, lighter over toward the Panhandle. Turbulence, quite a bit of moderate chop showing up all of the Aleutians, much of the southwest interior, Kodiak Island, south central Alaska, northwestward to the southern Arctic coast, western Brooks Range.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens of GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Eric, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And we've been talking about the complex gathering of information from satellites, looking down on the surface of the planet. And some of those orbits around the planet work for Alaska, and some of them don't. There's a lot of challenges with those. How can we get better imagery for the poles and specifically for Alaska?
Right. Well, today we're going to talk about a very interesting kind of satellite orbit that has potential to be real helpful for the high latitudes.
Okay.
Especially us here in Alaska. Canadians, Russians, Norwegians will all be interested in this. The satellites are not in orbit yet. Now the future is uncertain, but it's possible, and if this happens, it will be wonderful for Alaska. Okay. It's called the highly elliptical orbit.
Oh, that sounds
it's interesting. Yeah. And I think first, to help our discussion, we should get back to some of Kepler's laws and how do satellites work.
Sure.
Kepler's first law, an orbit of a planet around a sun or a weather satellite around the Earth is not necessarily a circle, it's an ellipse.
Okay.
And the highly elliptical orbit takes advantage of this aspect. We're going to put the Earth in one of the ellipse and then stretch one of the foci of the ellipse and then stretch that ellipse out real far to make it highly elliptical.
The foci is that bend part of the end of the ellipse. If you're going to stretch out a rubber band, that would be the center, kind of the stretchy part.
Yes.
Ends. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then Kepler's second law says that the closer something is to the thing that it's orbiting, the faster it goes.
Okay.
We see this in the solar system, that Mercury flies around the sun real fast. Jupiter, much slower. Jupiter's further away, it's slower. Mercury's closer in, it's faster. This happens with weather satellites too. Even satellites like the International Space Station, it's pretty close to the Earth. It goes around the Earth in only 90 minutes. That thing is moving. It's only 250 miles away. So how can we take advantage of these two aspects of Kepler's laws of motion to get better weather surveillance of Alaska? And this highly elliptical orbit is going to be the approach. So we have with us today our friendly planet Earth and our simulated satellite, the lid off of this salt shaker
like
here.
Sputnik there. Yeah.
Here it is. It's shiny, it's metal, it's space worthy. And what we want to be able to do is, could you have a satellite hover over the top of the world, up over Alaska? You can't really do that. Geostationary satellites have to be over the equator.
Okay.
So how could we almost solve this? And this is the tricky part. Maybe should we tilt the Earth over?
Focus on the pole. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, right?
So here we have the northern side of the planet, and we're going to trace out the orbit of a satellite with this salt shaker lid here. Now imagine a highly elliptical orbit. So let's put the Earth in one of the foci of the ellipse, and we'll have an imaginary foci out here. So the satellite will not go in a circle around the Earth, but will be in this long strung out ellipse. So the satellite will go...
Kind of like a racetrack.
Yes, there you go, like a racetrack. So it's an oval elliptical shape like that. And notice now that when the satellite's over here, we've got a nice view of the northern hemisphere around. There's Alaska, Russia, Canada, Greenland, all there. So that's the ellipse aspect of an orbit, Kepler's first law. The second law saying that when you're further away as a satellite, you go slower. And this we can take real advantage of. Because the way this orbit works, when the satellite goes over Antarctica here, it's going to be close to the Earth. It's going to be moving, whoosh, goes on by. And then as it comes out here, it will slow down. This increases what is known as the dwell time. the satellite will just hang here looking for hours at Alaska and the high Arctic. And then eventually it will come around and it will accelerate and whiz around the South Pole and then come back and hang here for a while because it's further away from the planet. It goes slower. It has to. That's the laws of motion. And such like that, repeating.
Wow.
Now, the real important way to make this work is you have to have two satellites. So that while one is whipping around the pole, you've got the other one out here, and they work as a team. You could then get a series of images of Alaska that can be almost from a constant frame of reference, and you can loop them together to make movies. You can take a picture every 10 minutes, say, of Alaska, and then loop it, playing it at several frames a second. You could see the clouds whiz on by. You know, the Weather Channel, weather broadcasters in the lower 48 especially can show these movie loops from the geostationary satellites. In Alaska, we've never really been able to do that very well, especially in the higher, most northern parts of the state, because those geostationary satellites are over the equator. It's not a good view. And this highly elliptical orbit whipping around the South Pole and then dwelling up here would be a way for us to get that constant frame of reference and do really good weather surveillance over the Arctic, seeing where those storms are, where they're going. Nothing quite like a movie loop of the weather in time to really illustrate what's important, what's going on.
And compared to what we have right now, we just have small windows or snapshots of what's going on with the polar orbiters. We don't have that long range view that's looking top down to give us that complete motion picture that helps us understand so much of the atmosphere at this
There's
point.
so many different kinds of satellites. Each has their advantage. Each is important, and the highly elliptical orbit satellite will also fit into that scheme. It's a nifty idea to solve an Alaskan challenge.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds really exciting. And again, kind of a satellite dream of the future to come. Okay, very good. Thanks for joining us today, Eric. We really appreciate the information. And if you'd like to learn more about what Eric does at Dehne, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we invite you to visit the web address that you see on your screen there. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the segment. And looking at the CS analysis today, continuing to slowly melt back. Definitely sea ice-free water there north of St. Lawrence Island. A narrow strip now along the southwest coast here into northern Kuskokwim Bay. Of course, Cook Inlet about ice-free as well. And this trend will continue here for the next several days. And for the southeast coast, light winds here on the south side there, 10 knots out of the west. Small craft advisory, south 25, seas 11 feet in the north coast. Gales for northern Lynn Canal with storm force gusts tomorrow. Good gradient right across the northern panhandle. That comes down to 25 for Stevens Passage. Light northwesterlies for Clarence Strait. And on Wednesday, we've got, northwest 15 for Clarence Strait, south 15 on the south coast, increased to 30 knots out of the west up here in the north with seas 13 to 15 feet with the small craft advisories. And then for the Prince William Sound zone, tomorrow, southeast 30 knots, seas 7 feet, gales, 35 knot southeasterly gales for all of the North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands, and that increases to 40 knots for Kachemak Bay out of the southeast, 15-foot seas there. Southern Cook Inlet here, quite a difference from northern Cook Inlet, will be east 15. South of the Forelands, southeast 35, seas considerably higher at 12 feet. And for Wednesday, swinging around to the south, 25 knots, still good for a small craft advisory, Southern Cook Inlet here with 8-foot seas. Same thing for Kachemak Bay. North of the Forelands, south 20 knots, 6-foot seas. And then Prince William Sound, south 15. And south 20 for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Small craft advisories, 12 to 13-foot seas for the Barren Islands and the western zone, western North Gulf Coast zone. East side of Kodiak tomorrow, gales, 18-foot seas. Shelikof Strait, small craft advisories, 11-foot seas. Gales here, south side of the Alaska Peninsula, 40 knots from Castle Cape to Sitkinak. Otherwise, minimum gales to Cape Sarachev. And good southwest stiff breeze at 30 knots for the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, right on into Bristol Bay with 8 to 13-foot seas. Next day on Wednesday, southwest 30 to 35 knots here for the peninsula, south 30 for Bristol Bay, southwest 30 here, and then south 30 for Shelikof Strait, southwest 25 there for the east side of Kodiak Island with those seas at 14 feet. And for the Fox Islands tomorrow, full gale, southwesterlies 40 knots, seas 15 to 22 feet. 15 to 24 feet, and 40 to 45 knot west-southwesterlies for Adak and Atka, and gale force winds becoming northwest out toward Chimney and Attu. Outlook for Wednesday, west 25 here for the western Aleutians. Small craft advisories everywhere for Wednesday, so losing the gales and keeping about 30 knots or 25 to 30 knots central and eastern Aleutians. Seas hanging in there at 18 to 20 feet here in the east, falling back 12 to 13 feet over the western part of the chain, and the Bering Sea side as well. Southwest coast tomorrow, southerlies 20 to 30 knots, 6 to 10 foot seas. South 30 knots, 13 foot seas for the Pribilofs. North 20 with seas at 10 feet. Seas 10 feet to St. Matthew Island. St. Lawrence Island, east 20 to 25 with 25 knot winds in over Norton Sound. Seas 5 to maybe 9 feet there. Highest seas out, course out over the northern Bering, as opposed to Norton Sound, which the next day will be southeast at 20 with 4 foot seas. And west-southwest 25 to 30, small craft advisories, St. Matthew Island into the southwest coast here, seas 9 to 13 feet. Lighter winds for the Pribilofs, west at 20 with 9 foot seas. Southeast there for Norton Sound, as I mentioned, and east at 20 with 7 foot seas for St. Lawrence Island. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, let's say the entire Arctic coast, pretty uniform. East 25 knots all the way down to Wales. Pretty easy forecast tomorrow. Very uniform wind speed and direction, as well as sea heights, which are all ice covered. So checking out Wednesday, still east 25 here on the east side, northeast 25 central coast, falling back to 20 knots out of the east on the western coast. Cape Beaufort down to Wales, 15 to 20 knots out of the east. For tonight again, big storm rolling northward. First wave here coming north. That's going to kick the winds up and the rain and spread it northward into the southwest interior. Original front washes out, and then that storm continues to move northward for tomorrow. High wind warnings, Alaska range, gusts 70 miles an hour, 50 to 70 miles an hour probably here across south central Alaska, southern Alaska with gusts 40 to 50 for Anchorage tomorrow out of the east-southeast. Showers windy out to the west, and the next day that whole system weakens with less wind and less precipitation. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.
I loved Ken Burns' series on the Civil War. It was deeply impacting. I love history. To have those stories told through these letters, through stories of love and loss,